Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to the first of the 4-week series of our intern talks up here at Touchstone Center for Crafts. We got a demonstration by Taylor Mezzo, who is one of our interns in the ceramics studio, and she's going to be giving us a demo on a few of her jewelry processes that she works with clay. I'm going to send it over to Taylor to introduce herself and talk a little bit about where she comes from before she jumps right into giving us the presentations. So thanks, Taylor, for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sitting outside Sarah's studio right now talking to you guys. My name is Taylor and I'm from Bradley, Illinois. I just got my BFA from Governor State University in December, right before COVID hit. So let's get started. This is some of my jewelry that I make and that I'll be demoing for you today. A lot of my jewelry processes revolve around adding these findings and these fixtures after things have been glazed fired. So that's mostly what I'm going to be talking. I am going to demo just cutting out some pieces and how I put them together. So I'll start with the slab. I rolled this slab out a couple hours ago and I let it stiffen up on this drywall board so that I could punch out all these shapes and they wouldn't stick and they would still kind of have their integrity. And this is red earthenware, by the way. Most of my jewelry is made from red earthenware. And one important thing when you're rolling out your slab is the thickness of it. If you're making jewelry, clay is already pretty, it's pretty solid, it's pretty heavy. So you want to make sure that that you're rolling out a pretty thin slab so that it's not weighing down on your ears or on your neck. What I did was I rolled it out between these two painter sticks because I know these two sticks are a thickness that I'm comfortable with. That would make a nice pendant or earring. When you're making earrings, I would say not to go any more than 4 centimeters thick. And if you're doing necklaces, I would say 8 centimeters. Otherwise, things really start to pull at your ears and things can weigh heavily on your neck and stuff. But other than that, it's good. Clay shrinks a little, but not enough to save you from the thickness of it. Okay. So first I'm going to show you how I would make these studs. They're kind of going perpendicular from each other. A lot of my work revolves around geometric shapes. When I'm making jewelry, I'm mostly just punching out shapes from a slab until there's nothing left. And then I begin sort of adding the shapes together or stacking them or taking one shape out of another shape until I reach something that satisfies me, that honestly I think would look nice. Working with jewelry also allows me to sort of like plan on bigger vessels. So you're able to work out a lot of little things when you make jewelry that can then apply to bigger works. But okay, so I punched these two pieces out. And what I do with these pieces is I'll make a notch into this triangle with my X-Acto blade that will fit over like this. And this is also when it's important for your slab to be kind of semi-hard and not super gummy. Because if they've done most of their drying already, they're gonna stay, perpendicular and not warp like a ton. And when I'm notching things like this, it's sort of like wood. The pieces will shrink into each other a little bit. So I'm only gonna score one side. This is not something I would recommend for like regular pieces though. So I'm just dabbing some extra slip where I know the creases are. And then once I give it some time to set up a bit, then I'll go back and I'll clean it up. So these ones are fun. I'll take different shapes of all different kinds and sort of just put them together. And it also makes for an interesting view if you view it head on versus sideways too. So that's that pair. I'm going to come back later and I'll sort of clean it up a bit. But also when I let them dry, I do sort of just prop them up like this. I'll lay them on something that I know is like a similar thickness so that they don't warp even more, or they don't warp at all, honestly. All right, here's another pair that, these are fun to make. So you can see with this pair, here, I'll take it off. These connection points between the two pieces. And these are made by adding little screw eyes into the piece and then connecting it with jump rings and chains. So when I'm making something like that, I'll do a square. In order to make a spot where that jump ring will sort of fit in, I need to make a hole into it for the jump ring to fit in later on. You can use a needle tool to make that hole. It doesn't need to go in very far. You just need to make a spot where it will go later on. You can also Kemper Tools makes these really cool things where they're drill bits attached to a tool already. And what's nice with the drill bit is that it's taking the clay away as you're drilling it and making the hole. This one's large, so it's just for demo's sake. But you'll notice if I was to do this on a piece and stick it all the way through, it's sort of, you know, your piece can crack or it'll create this little molehill around it. See? But when you're using a drill bit, it's scooping that clay away and it's not causing it to stretch at all. And then if you do get these molehills in them, I call them molehills, but they're just like little dimples in your clay. You can always take water on a canvas tabletop or on like a piece of sheetrock. And once things set up a bit, just do like some wet sanding. I call it faux wet sanding. And then it sort of flattens it out and takes it away. But it still leaves that hole in there for you to work with later on. And once you have pieces that you're happy with, so say this was all done, said and done, I'd fixed it, or I'd made it. It's important to think about orientation. Where do you want it to sit on your ear? Because that's important to know once it's done firing, where you're gonna put the stud. That's also important in terms of like balance. If I put the stud on here, you know, it's gonna, if I was to put it right on the back right here, it's gonna pull your ear to the side because this has weight to it. So it's, you know, it's best to put it where it makes sense with your ear. Another thing I want to mention too is I use a lot of these steel cutters when I'm making things, and they're pretty nifty. You can get some in cool shapes and you can custom order them into whatever shapes you want. But what I do a lot too, if I have a shape that I want to repeat, but it doesn't come in like a steel cutter, is I'll use tar paper. This is just a little squiggle that I have, and I cut it out of tar paper. And this stuff comes in like really big rolls and is used for construction, whatever. But it's nice because you can like sponge it down, you can wash it, your knife won't cut it. And it doesn't really like, you know, affect the clay. But I'll just use it, so I'll use my X-Acto. And then I know too that I'm going to be getting almost the same shape every time when I'm cutting it, depending on like how carefully I cut it. Because if I was to cut this whole thing by hand, you can imagine how like different they would be each time. This is also a good tool for this tar paper, yeah, for making multiples. If you want to make the same pair of earrings or anything twice. And of course, everything, when you cut it out of the clay, it can look kind of rough at first. And a lot can be done with the power of erosion, just a wet sponge when you're done. Or even your fingers, anything. It sort of helps it. It's also important too, when you're working with jewelry, that you really take your time in making the pieces finished, because it's something that's going to be directly touching sensitive parts of you, like your earlobe or the area around your neck. So you don't want it to be super scratchy, and you don't want it to be, you know, like unglazed or anything, because that's, yeah, that's hitting a really sensitive part of you. But okay. Oh, I talked about orientation. Okay. Moving on. These are some pieces that I have finished. So these have been glazed. This is black earthenware though. It's just a little bit different. Essentially, but you can see the spots where I had put my needle tool in to get that connection point. So these are going to hang similarly to these heart ones. Set one and on a stud. These little squiggles are important again about orientation. If I was going to put the stud back right here, you know, you can pick it up and try to imagine how it would sit on your ear, as opposed to if I put it in this corner, you know, it would sit like that. Or if I was to put it in this corner, it would probably, it would try to balance itself out while sitting on your ear. But yes. Okay. So these are some important jewelry findings that I use in most of my work. When I was talking about screw eyes earlier, that's what these are. Except these aren't threaded the way some screw eyes are. I buy them really long and then I will cut them down with my pliers. And then they're just gonna fit right in the hole here. It's always good to cut them long, see how they fit, and then go back and trim them if they're a little too tall to fit in there. And these are jump rings. So you might be able to tell on here, what's connecting the chain to the screw eye is just a tiny little loop called a jump ring. You can see it on here too. This one doesn't have chain, but it's just a jump ring that's connecting two screw eyes. It's also how you can connect pendants to necklaces. So you can see this is a different type of screw eye. It has a nice little hood on it, but it's just connecting the chain to the piece. And then these are earring studs. You put a little epoxy and then you put it on the back of the piece, and that's how you have a stud. So what's important in my work too is how I epoxy everything together. When I'm doing internal, I call them internal so that they're going in the clay, I will use Crazy Glue because it's clear and it dries super fast. This Crazy Glue comes with a kind of like a little needle nose on it. So it's really easy for me to just put it directly over the spot that I need. Although sometimes I will take the piece, I'll put it on the piece first, like the screw eye, like this, and then stick it in, because then there's less residual glue around the entry point, kind of. But I always do those parts first. So these connections that connect two pieces together, where the screw eyes will go, I do those first before I put the studs on the back. And I just said that this stuff dries really fast, and it does, but it's important too, when you're connecting it, not to put the chain on or put the check rings on too early in the process. Because if this epoxy or this super glue isn't dry yet, it'll just pull it right out of that socket. This is also something where if you need reading glasses, use them, because everything is so small. I'll walk away from my bench and things will be like, I'll be seeing double because they're so, it's just so tiny. It also helps to get these kind of, I have two different pliers. I have one for cutting things when I need to. And then I also have these really tight needle nose pliers that I use to connect jump rings, because they're just so small. I can't open them with my nails, and you shouldn't. You can definitely see them better with this. So I have this glued, and I'll be putting I'll be putting a check ring on every screw eye, kind of like this, so that the chain will connect to them. I used a really big screw eye for these, just for the sake so y'all could see it. Kind of feels like you're doing surgery sometimes. It's important too, when you're putting in the screw eye, that you think about which way it's going to sit. So because I put them facing outward like this, the screw eye is going to go perpendicular, or the check ring, the jump ring, is going to go perpendicular to that. If I wanted the jump ring to face towards us, I would put the screw eye in at 90 degrees more towards us. So there's a lot of pre-planning involved in this. In when you're making jewelry. If you're making studs, it's usually, you just have to focus on orientation of it, I would say. But if I was making things that were gonna dangle or be attached by some chain, with some chain like this, I need to think how many, I need to think of how many entry points I need to have for a screw eye first. Because once you fire it, there's no going back from that. You know, if you forget to put in a little hole for a screw eye, it's a stud now. There we go. So kind of boofed it a bit. This chain's just a hair longer. And that is going to affect the way it sits. You can see that. But that's something, that's an easy fix though. That's just clipping off another link of the chain and taking off the jump ring and whatever. Once you glue in these babies, the screw eyes, that's a different story. You're kind of stuck with that once you put it in there, unless you break it out and try to like Dremel it back on, but okay. And once you have these parts sort of adhered to your piece, then you want to put the stud on the back of it. So when I mix my stud, or when I try to attach my studs to the back of a piece, I use PC11. It's a 2-part epoxy. It's for submarines. It's super, super strong. And I'll mix it with a little bit of Mason stain. Otherwise, it's going to be just white. And the thing with ceramic jewelry is you're almost always going to have to glue one thing to another thing. If you want it to be a stud, you're going to have to glue a stud on the back of it. So instead of just using a clear epoxy, I kind of like to make a statement with this epoxy, which you can see it on the back of this. I'll mix a little bit of color into it because there's no denying that you're just gluing one piece onto another. So I try to make a statement about it. And you're mixing equal parts of each. It's kind of double-ended, so there's one part and then another part in the bottom. So I'll mix it together. And once I get it pretty well mixed together, and also remember, do this on a paper plate because it will ruin any other sort of dish that you do it on. I have this blue Mason stain that I like to mix in with it, just so it doesn't look like white paste. There's some sort of intention behind it when you mix it with a Mason stain. You're giving it a color, a bit of color. I would stay away from pinks and reds because when you add that to it, it kind of just looks like chewing gum. Ooh. So I'm just going to scoop a little at a time when I'm mixing it. It's kind of hard to see because I'm mixing it on the pattern part, but it doesn't take a whole lot. It's nice. I would always add a little bit at a time as opposed to a lot, because you're mixing a dry into kind of a wet like mixture. So it can kind of mess with it a bit. But I always mix this with a toothpick or a bamboo skewer so that it doesn't get on my hands. But I'll take a little bit on the bamboo skewer. And so I want these to sit on my ear like this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the finding, the stud back right here so that I know that's how it's gonna sit on my ear. Always add your epoxy to the stud back first instead of putting it on the piece and then attaching this. So I have a little mountain mixed. And this stuff does not dry as fast as the crazy glue. This, I will let it sit for like a whole day before I even touch it again. And don't glue them on with the earring backs on them, because you're just more likely to glue this to the stud. Ooh. And that's the gist of it. I know I went over a lot of information really fast. But you can see this is what it's like when it's pretty dried. It's stable. I've tried to break it off before, and you'll break this post before you break it off of the piece. I did write down some of the places that you can find these jewelry findings at. If you're looking to go somewhere where they're relatively cheap, I would recommend Hobby Lobby or Michael's. But Fire Mountain Gems and Rings and Things, you can order things by the quantity. And they have, you know, they have different sizes. If you were to go to Michael's, they might only have one size of earring post. But on Fire Mountain Gems, they have them in way different like millimeters sizes. So you could get one that's 10 millimeters. If you had a really big piece or a piece that was a little more heavy, I would get one with a bigger post because there's more surface area for you to put epoxy on and for it to attach. You can see I've gotten these smaller pieces so that I can make smaller earrings instead. It's also important you don't want the bottom post to be so big that it sticks out from the front when you glue it on. But yeah, those two websites are good. You can order them by quantity. You could order them in the hundreds. It's pretty sweet. I also wrote down the Instagram names and two artists who also make really good ceramic jewelry. Jen Allen makes really good ceramic jewelry. She does it in a different way than I do. She uses high temperature wire to connect all of her pieces. And then Julie Moon is a good artist out of Canada. Everything I know about jewelry I know because of Julie. She uses the same method as I do, where you sort of poke holes and then you use screw eyes and then you attach them with jump rings. And I also wrote down my information because if you do have questions that I don't answer in this Zoom call, you can always just DM me or email me. So yeah, can we open it up to questions now? I know that was really fast.
Great, thanks, Taylor. That was great. It's great to see how you make your jewelry. And yeah, does anybody have any questions for Taylor about her jewelry or her process? If you do, you are more than welcome to come on the video and do that as well, rather than do it through the chat.
Mhm.
Let's see, we do got one question. What part of the process do you enjoy the most?
Oh, I like constructing them for sure out of the clay because that's the most playful part to me. I'm just stamping out all of these different shapes and it's a playful part. Yeah, it's a lot of exploration. It gives me ideas for other pots because I'm also a potter. So that's definitely the fun part. I would think this end of the spectrum is more the mechanical part where I'm just gluing. I kind of become a little factory. I'm just gluing things on. You know, I'm letting them dry. I'm cutting pieces of fine metal. Yeah, that's the fun part. Fun part for sure.
Oh, this is a great one. Have you ever tried precious metal clay?
No,
Do
I'm
you
not
know
even
anything
sure.
about precious metal clay?
Yeah, I don't even have a good idea of what that is exactly. I know you can buy precious metal clay on Fire Mountain Gems. I've seen that. But yeah, I don't have a good grasp on what that is. I just like earthing.
We don't either, but we've had a few instructors here at Touchstone that used it. Which honestly, it's a great question because I feel like I know so many ceramics people that make jewelry, and
Yeah.
you kind of work with it in a similar manner. It is really expensive compared to clay, but it does work kind of in the same manner. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's something to kind of look into in the future. Um, do you sketch any of your ideas out before you start?
I do if I have a specific idea in mind. I will sketch it out before I start it, but most of the time I don't. Again, it's that part of the play. When I make jewelry, I don't set out to make, you know, like this many necklaces and this many earrings. I just kind of, it's a fun exercise to like let loose and just sort of see what comes out of it. I do, I will see other earrings that are more commercially made, and I try to think of how I can sort of make that into a fresh design or revamp that into or make it into something more abstract, because I'll see these really intricate and extravagant designs and I'll be like, okay, but what if it was a square? Like what if I made it with as few lines as possible? But no, often I don't sketch it out. Jewelry is like the nice relaxing part of my making process. So no.
Great. Do you see your jewelry relating to your studio, your other studio practices, being a potter?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I try to connect the two by using similar glaze palettes. I know this teal is a color that shows up a lot in my pot too. Um, Same with this sort of like rutile color. I think a lot of my pots too are based in geometric shapes, you know. They're very minimalistic. A lot of my pots include slabs, just like how these pieces of jewelry are made out of slabs. And when I put a slab on a pot, I usually leave it unglazed on the edges, similar to my jewelry. So they have that that factor in common.
How do you go about glazing them?
Hmm?
How do you go about glazing your pieces?
Oh,
Just
there.
on the one side of them?
Yes. So this pair, I should have brought a kiln stilt out. So the holes that I make for the key rings, I will use a kiln. They make special ones for like beads and whatnot, where there's a little post sticking out of a kiln stilt like this. And I will put it on the kiln stilt like that. Here, I'll show you with this. That way I can glaze both sides of it. I'll glaze it super funky like this. I'll stick it in that post. That way I can get both sides glazed. Because that is really important when you have a necklace. You don't want like this scratchy part touching you. I'd much rather have a glazed surface like touching on my neck or on my ears. The edges being unglazed is just an aesthetic choice for me. It's something that I like. I like to show off the color of the clay, and I think that that's a good way to do it in a minimal aspect that also doesn't affect, you know, what's actually touching you. But mostly I just brush on glazes. These are commercial Mako glazes. And they're
Do you
fun.
have any problems with any of these warping? Since clay kind of has a tendency to warp, especially in slab form.
Yes. So that's also, that goes back to like constructing it. I make sure that I'm compressing my slab with a rib. I'll use a harder rib, not necessarily, I'll use a metal one, not a rubber one, but I compress it a lot. And then it also goes back to how they're drying. So I mentioned these guys earlier. You can tell this one warped ever so slightly. But the reason I have them drying sort of on, I'll do all sorts of funky things just to get them not to warp. I'll have them dry on top of another piece like this, or on top of another slab, the way I had these sort of like stilted like that. Because if I was to let it dry like that, yeah, that would become warped like that. But as long as you compress your slab and you make sure it stays flat when you're using it, you're not picking it up and you're not moving it, you're moving it from a flat surface to another flat surface. That helps a lot with warping.
Right.
Making sure it stays flat.
So we do have one question. I think it's about your bolo ties on the table. Just a little bit of information on those, because there's, I mean, I think you're the only one I've seen make ceramic bolo ties. So
Yeah, so these are a similar process to adding a screw eye into a piece. So I will drill a hole. I'll use a really thicker slab for these because they need to have some thickness to have this brass put into it. That's what this is. I'll just have a slab and I'll screw a hole into it. And I'll take into account shrinkage too. That way, once it's done glazed, being glazed and stuff, I'll put the crazy glue in there and then I'll attach this little brass piece to it. But it's similar to making a necklace. The back is not glazed. And it's always easier to epoxy something to an unglazed surface. But this is similar, you know, to putting the stud on the back of a piece. It's just a really big stud if you think about it that way. And the cord is, this part isn't clay related, but yeah, I'll crazy glue these in and then I'll pinch the tips so that they won't come off. And once you learn the basics of like how to make an earring or how to make a necklace pendant, they're really similar across other forms of jewelry. Like if you were to make a brooch or a pin, or if you were to make dangle earrings, it's just making sure you poke the hole in the right place.
great. Does anybody else have any other questions? If not, then we definitely give Taylor a big round of applause for being our first intern to come on and do her artist demonstration for us. It was great to learn a little bit about her process. I know I knew nothing about making ceramic jewelry. I have a ceramics background, so that was really wonderful. I say definitely, if you are interested in looking at any of Taylor's other work, you should check out her Instagram, which is
Taylor A. Mezzo. My name. Also check out these people because they're very good.
Definitely check out all of those, but definitely to learn about her work, go to her Instagram or shoot an email if you have any questions about the process you've seen.
Oh, can I say one thing before I leave though?
Yep.
This is a process that you could use it with polymer clay too. You know, it doesn't have to be earthenware clay. It could be like clay that you bake in your oven. If you don't have access to a kiln, because I know these are trying times.
That is definitely true. So, Great. Well, thank you. For those of you who are tuning in, next week we do have another intern presentation from Taylor Fence, who is our small metals intern. So be sure to tune in, same time, same place next week. So next Tuesday at 7 o'clock at night. I'm not 100% sure what she's going to be talking about yet, but it should be another great presentation. And thank you all. And thank you, Taylor, for talking with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Everybody have a good night.
Bye.